My name is Elena Vance, and I am 46 years old. To the United States Navy, I am Rear Admiral Vance, a keeper of secrets that could topple empires. But to my family, I am still just the inconvenient daughter. Today, at my sister's wedding in Newport, they had no idea that the foundation of their perfect, polished life is a lie I can shatter with a single word. As I drove along the coast, watching the sunlight glitter on the waves, a foolish hope surfaced anyway. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe the sea breeze and champagne could wash away years of being made to feel invisible. For a moment, I was just a woman trying to believe in the idea of family. That hope was shattered by the chime of a single text message. It was from my mother, a dagger disguised as a notification. "Elena, for God's sake, I heard you were thinking of wearing that uniform. Don't. It's an embarrassment to the family name." My hands tightened on the wheel, my knuckles white. An embarrassment, the 2 silver stars I earned in an ocean of fire and steel, reduced to an insult. The air left my lungs in a silent gasp, replaced by a deep, profound, and dangerous cold. They wanted me to feel small. Have you ever been made to feel small for the very thing that made you great? Let me know in the comments, because they were expecting a ghost in a beige dress. They're about to meet a Rear Admiral in her full, unapologetic uniform. The decision to wear my uniform wasn't born from that single text message alone. It had been forged over years of quiet dismissals, each one a small cut, but together they had bled me dry of any hope for their acceptance. The final wound had opened a few weeks prior, right after I'd returned to my apartment in Norfolk from a grueling joint forces exercise in the Atlantic. The air in my apartment was still and cool, a welcome silence after the constant hum of a warship. I craved nothing more than a hot shower and the anonymity of my own space. I poured myself a glass of water, the ice cubes clinking in the sudden quiet, and sat down with my tablet. I rarely checked my social media feed, finding it a world of curated happiness I couldn't quite relate to. But that day, something drew me in. And there it was. A professionally shot photograph of my sister, Eliza, her face alight with joy, twirling in the arms of a man I didn't recognize. The setting was unmistakable, the waterfront deck of the Ida Lewis Yacht Club in Newport, a place synonymous with my family's social circle. The caption read, "She said yes, the future Mr. and Mrs. Halpern." My heart didn't sink. It simply stopped for a moment, a hollow thud in my chest. Hundreds of comments flooded the post. My mother, Eleanor, had left a string of effusive heart emojis. My father, Richard, had reposted the image with his own caption. "So proud of our beautiful family and the legacy we continue to build." I scrolled through every photo in the album. Eliza with her friends, Eliza with her new fiancé, Eliza with our parents. I searched for my name in the tags, in the comments, anywhere. There was nothing. It was a digital erasure. It wasn't a mistake. It was a message. I was not part of that beautiful family, not part of that legacy. I was just elsewhere. The feeling wasn't sadness. It was a cold, stark emptiness. The feeling of looking at a map of your own life and finding your hometown has been wiped off. A few days later, the physical proof of my status arrived. A thick, cream-colored envelope lay in my mailbox, the kind of expensive cardstock my mother favored. It smelled faintly of her signature Lily of the Valley perfume. But the address label struck me like a slap. Not Rear Admiral Elena Vance, not even Elena. It was addressed to the Vance family, Norfolk, VA, as if I were a satellite office of the main brand. Inside, the invitation was elegantly embossed, announcing the wedding at the Chandler at Cliff Walk. There was no handwritten note, no personal touch, just a QR code to scan for the RSVP. It wasn't an invitation, it was a summons, a bureaucratic notification to a peripheral family member. It was my mother's way of reminding me that I was being allowed to attend, not welcomed. That evening, I decided to call Ben Carter. Not to complain, but to ground myself in a world where my existence had weight. I dialed his number, my hand steady despite the tremor in my soul. He picked up on the second ring. Admiral. His voice was a familiar anchor of respect. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. Ben, I said, my own voice sounding distant, frighteningly calm. They're getting married. There was a beat of silence on the other end. He knew exactly who they were. I see, he said, his tone carefully neutral, but I could hear the undercurrent of anger on my behalf. They don't want an admiral in the family photos, Ben, I stated, the words tasting like ash. They want a ghost. Another pause, this one longer. I could picture him in his office, staring out at the naval base, his jaw tight. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and firm, laced with the fierce loyalty forged in shared danger. Ma'am, he said, the single word carrying the weight of years of service together. Ghosts are nothing. It's the light that makes the shadows, and your light is bright enough to black out their entire sky. His words didn't heal the wound, but they cauterized it. They stopped the bleeding. I ended the call, the cold resolve settling deep in my bones. I walked over to my closet and opened the doors. There, hanging in its protective garment bag, was my service dress white uniform. The crisp, immaculate white, the rows of ribbons telling stories they would never understand. And on the shoulders, the 2 silver stars I had earned. They called it an embarrassment, but they didn't know its real name. It was my armor, it was my truth, and it was the only thing I would be wearing to that wedding. The weight of my mother's text message felt heavier than any gear I had ever carried. It wasn't just a command, it was the echo of a lifetime of dismissals. As I gripped the steering wheel, the image of my crisp white uniform hanging in my closet dissolved, replaced by a memory just as stark, just as white. It was the memory of my first uniform, and the day I earned the right to wear it. The day my family decided they had better things to do. My mind drifted back, the miles of I-95 fading into the sprawling green of Annapolis. The Navy Marine Corps Memorial Stadium was electric, a sea of families buzzing with a pride so thick you could taste it. The air was filled with cheers and the soaring notes of "Anchors Aweigh." And then the moment came. The command was given, and 1,000 white hats sailed into the brilliant blue sky. A flock of white birds ascending in perfect unified celebration. I stood there, a newly commissioned ensign in the United States Navy, my smile feeling stiff and foreign on my face. My eyes scanned the stands, searching for the section, the row, the exact seats I had circled on a map for them. But they were empty, just 2 stark, blue, empty plastic seats in a crowd of thousands. The phone call had come that morning just as I was polishing the buttons on my uniform. It was my father, Richard, his voice clipped and hurried. "Elena, something's come up, a major investment opportunity in Shanghai. The timing is terrible, I know, but it's a game changer. We can't miss it." My mother, Eleanor, got on the line next, her voice smooth as silk, dripping with false sympathy. "You know your father, dear. Business first. We're so terribly proud, of course." "And Eliza?" My 17-year-old sister had a club tennis tournament. A club tournament. Not the regionals, not the nationals. A simple local club tournament was apparently more important than her only sister's graduation from one of the most prestigious military academies in the world. I stood among my cheering, embracing classmates, posing for pictures with their beaming parents, and I had never felt more profoundly alone. The photo I have from that day shows me with 3 of my roommates, our arms around each other, smiling bravely. But if you look closely at my eyes, you can see the void where my family was supposed to be. A week later, a thick envelope from their bank arrived at my new Spartan quarters. Inside, there was no letter, no proud note, just a check for $5,000 and a small, elegant card with my mother's perfect, emotionless script. "Congratulations, dear. Buy yourself something pretty to celebrate. Perhaps a pearl necklace." A pearl necklace. As if 4 years of grueling marine engineering courses, sleepless nights studying naval strategy, and a solemn oath to defend my country could be measured and dismissed with a piece of jewelry. It wasn't just thoughtless, it was a profound insult. It was their way of translating my world into the only language they understood, the language of price tags and status symbols. In their world of lavish parties and designer brands, my achievement had no real value. I remember standing there, holding that check, feeling the cold weight of their misunderstanding. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, I tore the check into tiny, precise pieces and let them fall into the trash can like confetti at a one-person parade. It was the last time I ever hoped they would understand. The bitterness of that memory was compounded every time I returned to the family home in Newport. The house was a museum of Eliza's triumphs. The walls were lined with photos of her winning ribbons at equestrian events, her prom pictures, her acceptance letter to Boston College, framed in ornate silver. A few months after my Annapolis graduation, an entire glossy album was dedicated to her 17th birthday. Dozens of photos taken at the famed L'Espalier restaurant in Boston. Eliza in a designer dress, laughing as our parents presented her with the keys to a brand new white BMW. My father and mother stood on either side of her, their faces radiant with a pride that was almost blinding. And my presence in this family shrine? It was a single, small 4x6 photograph, tucked away on a crowded bookshelf in the library, almost hidden behind a leather-bound collection of Dickens. It was the photo from graduation day, the one with my roommates. To any visitor, it would look like a picture of their daughter's friend. It was clear the Vance family had one daughter, a perfect, beautiful daughter. I was just a stranger who sometimes stayed in the guest room. I should have known it would be this way. I should have remembered the night I told them I was accepting my appointment to Annapolis. We were in the mahogany-paneled living room, the air thick with the scent of old money and wood polish. My father set down his glass of scotch, the crystal clinking softly on the marble coaster. He looked at me not with anger, but with a deep, weary disappointment that was somehow worse. "Elena," he'd said, his voice level, "the Navy is no place for a Vance woman. Our name was built in boardrooms, not on the decks of ships. You are wasting your intelligence, wasting the connections I could provide for you, on something that offers no tangible benefit to this family." At the time, a younger, more naive version of me thought he simply didn't understand my passion, my need to serve something larger than myself. But looking back now as I drove towards my sister's wedding, I finally understood. Tangible benefit to the family was a code. It never meant honor or duty or sacrifice. It meant stock prices and strategic partnerships. My entire life, my entire career, was just an entry on the wrong side of their ledger. He was wrong, of course. My choice wasn't a waste. It had forged me into the woman I was. But he was also right about one thing. It had come at a cost. The cost was a profound, unshakable loneliness. A solitude you can only find in the middle of a vast, empty ocean, or in a crowded room full of your own family. My father was wrong. My choice wasn't a waste. It forged me. But the cost of that forging was a solitude so profound it had its own geography, a loneliness measured not in miles from home, but in the vast, empty stretches of the ocean. My family saw my career as an abstraction, a series of pins on a map. For me, it was a life lived in steel corridors, under skies that held no pity. The first few years were a blur of missed holidays. My first Christmas as an officer was spent on a destroyer in the Persian Gulf, the air thick with sand and tension. I remember calling home on a crackling satellite phone, the delay on the line making the distance feel even greater. On the other end, I could hear the familiar sounds of a Newport Christmas party, the clinking of glasses, the swell of music, a burst of laughter. My mother's voice was bright and distant. "Oh, Elena, darling, it's not a great time. We're just sitting down to dinner." Through the static, I heard Eliza excitedly describing a new diamond bracelet. The call lasted less than a minute. There was no "Are you safe?" or "We miss you." While they passed around a platter of glistening roast goose and poured expensive Bordeaux, I sat in the ship's metallic, windowless wardroom, eating a lukewarm meal ready to eat, the beef stew packet. That was the moment I truly understood. I wasn't just absent, I was forgotten. An inconvenient detail in their perfect holiday narrative. My promotions didn't come from a family connection or a well-placed phone call. They were earned in 36-hour shifts on the bridge, fueled by stale black coffee and the sheer will to not fail. They were earned by making life-or-death decisions in seconds, with the lives of 200 sailors in my hands. I remember one deployment in the North Sea. A rogue storm, a weather bomb, materialized out of nowhere, turning the ocean into a churning gray monster. The waves were the size of office buildings, crashing over the bow with a sound like cannons firing. For 2 straight days, I didn't leave the command deck. I lived on dry crackers and the adrenaline pumping through my veins, my eyes burning from staring at the radar, coordinating our every move to keep the ship from being torn apart. We made it back to port in Scotland, exhausted, bruised, but whole. I felt a quiet, bone-deep pride in my crew, in myself. That same week, I saw a picture Eliza had posted from the breakers in Palm Beach. She was wrapped in a fluffy white robe, a cucumber slice over one eye, with a caption complaining about how exhausted she was after a hard week of shopping. The contrast didn't make me angry or jealous. It created a chasm. It was as if we were living in different realities, operating under different laws of physics, where my exhaustion was a matter of survival, and hers was a luxury. In her world, my entire life was invisible. But the warmth I never found in my family's gilded cage, I discovered it in the most unexpected of places, on the rolling decks of those gray ships. It was in the small, unspoken gestures of my crew. I remember a young Ben Carter, then just an ensign himself, quietly placing a steaming mug of chicken soup in my trembling, frozen hands after a grueling watch in the freezing Arctic. He didn't say much, just, "Figured you could use this, ma'am." The non-commissioned officers, my chiefs, would somehow know it was my birthday, and a lopsided homemade cake would mysteriously appear in the galley. They were my family. They saw the dark circles under my eyes and understood their origin. They saw the rank on my collar and knew what it had cost to put it there. They didn't care about my last name or my father's stock portfolio. They cared about the officer who stood beside them, the one who would go through hell and back for them. It was a fierce, unvarnished loyalty that money could never buy and my family would never understand. That truth was never clearer than after the Orion incident. It was the mission that nearly ended my career, the one where I had to defy a direct order to save my crew. When I finally got a few days of shore leave, I went home to Newport. The silence in the house was heavy. At the dinner table, over a perfectly cooked filet mignon, I tried to tell my father about it. I spoke of the crushing pressure, the sonar failure, the choice I had to make. He nodded vaguely, his eyes fixed on the financial news ticker on the large screen TV in the den. "Sounds intense," he said, his voice laced with disinterest. "By the way, Lockheed Martin's stock is up again." Before I could respond, Eliza chimed in, wrinkling her nose. "Ugh, can you not talk about scary stuff like that? It's ruining my appetite." I stopped talking. I looked at their faces, bathed in the soft light of the dining room chandelier, and I realized they were not just uninterested, they were incapable of understanding. In their safe, predictable world, war, danger, life, and death were just abstract concepts from a movie. They were not my reality. My reality, with all its grit and honor, was just an inconvenient story, a disruption to their perfectly seasoned meal. In the cold, indifferent world my family inhabited, I was a ghost. But on the steel decks of the United States Navy, amidst the very people I had sworn to lead and protect, I was seen. The warmth I never found in the mahogany-paneled rooms of Newport. I found it in the small, steadfast actions of my chosen family. And at the center of that family was Ben Carter. Ben was more than just my executive officer. He became the silent guardian of my sanity. He learned to read the weather of my moods, particularly after the infrequent icy phone calls from my parents. He knew that my family was a vulnerability, a weak point in my armor. After a particularly cutting conversation with my mother, he wouldn't pry or offer platitudes. Instead, a little while later, a mug of steaming Earl Grey tea, black, no sugar, would appear on my desk. He never asked what was said. He would simply say, "You look tired, Admiral. Maybe you should take a moment." He built an invisible buffer around me, a quiet sanctuary where my pain didn't need an explanation. While my own family constructed walls to keep me out, Ben built a fortress to protect me. That silent, intuitive care was worth more than 1,000 empty apologies. He also became my personal historian, the sole keeper of a history my family chose to ignore. He remembered the milestones I myself often forgot in the relentless pace of my duties. On the 10th anniversary of the day I took command of my first ship, the USS Gonzales, I was buried in operational reports and completely oblivious. But when I walked into my office that morning, a small, exquisitely detailed model of the destroyer was sitting on my desk. Next to it was a handwritten card on simple, government-issue stock. It read, "Happy anniversary, Admiral. She was a lucky ship to have you." He remembered. He had taken the time to learn the chapters of my life, not out of idle curiosity, but out of a deep and abiding respect. In those moments, I felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over me. It was the feeling of being truly seen, a validation that the sacrifices I had made mattered to someone. Our bond was deepest not in words, but in shared silence. I remember one night, weeks after the official inquiry into the Orion incident had concluded, a conclusion that left me cleared but scarred. We were on the deck of the USS Farragut, cutting through the warm, dark waters of the Arabian Sea. The stars were a brilliant, indifferent canopy above us. I had been quiet for a long time, just watching the phosphorescent wake of the ship. "You're thinking about them, aren't you?" Ben's voice was soft, barely a whisper above the thrum of the engines. I didn't have to ask who them was, he knew. My shoulders sagged, a rare break in my military posture. "Sometimes I wonder if it's worth it, Ben," I confessed, my voice thin. "All of this." He didn't answer right away. He just stood beside me, a steadfast presence, and looked up at the American flag, snapping crisply in the night wind. "It's worth it to the people on this ship, Admiral," he said finally, his gaze unwavering. "It's worth it to me. And in the end, that's the family that matters." He wasn't trying to fix my relationship with my parents. He was simply reminding me of the family I had chosen, the one I had fought for. That quiet allegiance was forged into an unbreakable alliance the day my career almost ended. When Vice Admiral Croft made me the scapegoat for the Orion disaster, I was summoned to a closed-door hearing at the Pentagon. The political maneuvering was thick, and I was sure I would have to face it alone. But I was wrong. When the hearing concluded and I walked out of that sterile, intimidating room, exhausted and disillusioned, the first thing I saw was Ben. He had flown from Norfolk to Washington, D.C. on his own dime. He was standing across the hall in his immaculate dress uniform under the harsh fluorescent lights, holding a black umbrella even though we were indoors. He walked towards me, his expression grim but resolute. He didn't say, "I told you so," or "Are you okay?" He simply opened the umbrella, as if to shield me from more than just the rain outside. "I'm here, Admiral," he said, his voice a low, steady anchor. "Whatever happens next, I'm not going anywhere. The truth has a witness." In that moment, under that ridiculously formal umbrella in a sterile government hallway, I knew I wasn't alone. Our alliance wasn't built on blood or a shared name. It was forged in the fire of shared duty, tempered by the storms of the high seas, and sealed by a quiet, unwavering loyalty. It was stronger than blood, and it would prove to be the only thing I could truly count on when the final storm, the one brewing within my own family, finally broke. The alliance I had with Ben became my fortress in the years that followed, a bastion of loyalty in a world where my own blood relatives saw me as little more than a tool. I was naive to think the fallout from the Orion incident might have changed them, that a near disaster might have recalibrated their priorities. But I was wrong. A month before Eliza's wedding, a phone call from my father proved that they never change. They just find new, more insidious ways to use you. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in my office at Naval Station Norfolk, reviewing personnel files. My phone rang and the caller ID read Richard Vance. It was a rare event. My father communicated primarily through brief, impersonal holiday texts. I answered, a familiar sense of caution tightening my stomach. But his voice was unusually warm, almost jovial. "Elena, sweetheart, it's been too long. How are you?" I was immediately on guard. This was not the voice of the man who ignored my graduation. This was a performance. He asked about my health, about the weather in Virginia, about my command, questions a normal father would ask, yet coming from him, they felt scripted and strange. "I heard your fleet just secured a major contract for next-generation sonar technology," he said casually. "Fascinating stuff." For one foolish, desperate moment, a spark of hope ignited within me. Maybe he was finally trying. Maybe after all these years, he saw me as more than just a deviation from his life plan. So I answered cautiously, sharing a few unclassified details about the project's scope. We spoke for nearly 10 minutes, the longest conversation we'd had in years. I started to relax, to let my guard down, and that's when the trap was sprung. By the way," he said, his voice shifting seamlessly into the clipped all-business tone I knew so well. "Your old acquaintance, Vice Admiral Croft, happens to be a business partner of mine. He's got a subsidiary company that's putting in a bid for that sonar contract. He was saying how beneficial it would be if someone on the inside, someone like you, could perhaps nudge the procurement committee in their direction, or maybe just provide a little insight into the competing bids. It would be a huge help for the family business, Elena." The line went silent. The warmth in my chest from moments before turned to ice. It was all a lie. The entire conversation was a calculated prelude to this request. I wasn't his daughter, I was an asset. An intelligent source to be exploited for his and Croft's financial gain. The disappointment was a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. He didn't see me, Elena, the woman, the officer. He saw the 2 silver stars on my shoulders and the doors he thought they could unlock for him. "No," I said, my voice flat and cold. "Absolutely not. What you're asking is unethical, illegal, and a violation of my oath." My father's manufactured warmth evaporated. "Don't be so dramatic," he snapped before hanging up abruptly. A few hours later, my mother called, her weapon of choice, not a direct assault, but a wave of guilt and passive aggression. "Elena, you've disappointed your father," she began, her voice a symphony of practiced sorrow. "You just don't understand, do you? Everything he does for this family, for Eliza's future, to maintain the lifestyle we've all worked so hard for." The familiar lecture began, a tirade about loyalty and obligation. "A little help is all he asked for. You've always been so rigid, so military. Sometimes you need to be flexible for the people who love you." Her definition of flexible was for me to commit a federal crime. Her definition of family was a closed circle, consisting of her, my father, and Eliza. I was an outsider, expected to contribute, but never truly belong. The final, most degrading assault came from Eliza herself. She called me that evening, her voice thick with staged, hiccuping sobs. "Elena, Mom told me everything," she cried. "How could you do that to Dad? He's been so stressed about his investments." Then came the manipulation, cloaked in bridal anxiety. She talked about the rising costs for the wedding, the caterer, the flowers, her dream of a perfect honeymoon in a Bora Bora overwater bungalow. "It was just a small favor, big sis," she pleaded, her voice a pathetic whine. "You have everything, your career, your important position. I just want a beautiful start to my new life. Can't you just help us for once?" She was using her wedding, her one day of supposed happiness, as a tool of emotional blackmail. She was weaponizing her own tears. That was it. That was the moment. The last vestiges of sorrow in my heart burned away, leaving behind nothing but cold, hard fury. The disappointment was gone, replaced by a clarity so sharp it hurt. They had used every tactic in their playbook. Feigned affection, guilt, and now a damsel in a wedding dress. They had treated my honor, the very core of my being, as a commodity to be bartered. Fine. They wanted a perfect wedding in Newport. I would be there, but I wouldn't be coming alone. I'd be bringing the truth with me. And the truth doesn't wear a beige dress. My cold resolve, forged in the wake of Eliza's manipulative phone call, carried me north to Newport. I checked into a room at the Hotel Viking, a historic landmark just a short drive from my family's sprawling seaside estate. I didn't call them to announce my arrival. I knew they would find out. The day before the wedding, driven by a final fading sense of duty, I drove to the Chandler at Cliff Walk, the opulent venue overlooking the Atlantic. The ballroom was a flurry of activity. My mother and Eliza were in deep consultation with a frantic-looking wedding planner, pointing at floral arrangements and linen samples. I approached them, my footsteps echoing softly on the marble floor. "It's all looking beautiful," I offered, my voice even. My mother glanced up, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes before it was masked by a tight smile. "Elena, you're here." She turned back to the planner. Eliza simply gave a tight little wave, then leaned in to whisper something to her maid of honor, who giggled and shot a sideways look at me. I tried to offer a suggestion about the seating chart, noting that 2 elderly cousins might prefer to be seated away from the band. My mother waved a dismissive hand. "The professionals have it handled, dear. What would you know about these things?" I was an outsider, a tourist in the landscape of my own family's life, invited only to observe from a distance. That distance became a canyon at the rehearsal dinner that evening. The event was held at a chic restaurant on Bowen's Wharf, the air smelling of salt and expensive perfume. The main table, a long, beautifully decorated affair, was reserved for the immediate family. My parents, Eliza and her fiancé, and his parents. There was no seat for me. The wedding planner, a young woman with a perpetually worried expression, approached me apologetically. "Admiral Vance," she stammered, "there's a place for you over here?" She gestured to a smaller, round table in the corner near the service entrance. The Friends of the Family table. I was seated next to a great-aunt I hadn't seen in 20 years, who spent the evening asking me if I was still in the Coast Guard. I sat there, nursing a glass of sparkling water, and watched. I watched my father stand up, tap his glass for attention, and begin a glowing tribute to his wonderful daughter, Eliza. He spoke of her beauty, her charm, her bright future. He spoke of legacy and pride. Throughout the entire 5-minute speech, he never once looked in my direction. He never once mentioned my name. It was a masterful public erasure. In that room, in front of everyone they knew, Richard Vance made it clear that he had only one daughter worthy of acknowledgement. The final straw wasn't grand or dramatic. It was small, quiet, and utterly devastating. I had spent months searching for the perfect wedding gift for Eliza. Not something from a registry, but something with meaning. I found it in an antique shop in Annapolis, a heavy brass maritime compass from the 1940s. I had it engraved with the date of the wedding and the geographic coordinates of the small Newport chapel where our grandparents had been married. It was a symbol of guidance, of a true beginning, of the real family legacy they pretended to care about. At the dinner, during a lull in the conversation, I walked over to the main table and presented the small, velvet-boxed gift to Eliza. "Oh, thanks," she said, her voice distracted. She opened it, glanced at the compass for a fraction of a second, and then set it down on the table with a soft thud. Her attention was immediately captured by a friend who was loudly admiring a new glittering diamond tennis bracelet on Eliza's wrist. The compass sat forgotten next to a bread plate. Later, as the dinner was winding down, I saw a waiter clearing the table. He picked up the bread plate, the used napkins, and his hand brushed against the compass, nearly sweeping it into the bus tub along with the other refuse. My gift. My months of thought, my symbol of our shared history, was treated as disposable clutter. I stood up and walked out of the restaurant. No one noticed. I walked down the wharf, past the gleaming yachts, and onto the cliff walk. The cold, salty wind whipped at my face, but I didn't feel it. There were no tears, not this time. The deep, abiding hurt that had been my lifelong companion had finally burned away, leaving something else in its place, a pure, clarifying rage. 25 years of being ignored, dismissed, used, and now publicly humiliated. The discarded compass was more than a gift. It was me, my values, my history, my honor, all casually swept aside. I stopped and looked out at the black, churning expanse of the Atlantic. The ocean didn't judge. It was vast, powerful, and honest. In its roar, I found my own. The quiet, obedient daughter was gone, washed away by a final tidal wave of disrespect. I took a deep, steadying breath, the salt air filling my lungs. Never again, I whispered to the wind. No more silence. No more making myself small to fit into their narrow world. The battle had been declared, not with ships or weapons, but with the one thing they were most afraid of, the unvarnished truth. In life, everyone has a breaking point, that one moment where endurance ends and action begins. The moment you look in the mirror and say, enough. What was yours? Share that moment of finding your strength in the comments below. The rage that had consumed me on the cliff walk did not dissipate. It crystallized. Back in the sterile quiet of my hotel room, the hurt was gone, replaced by the cold, clear focus of a commander preparing for battle. I didn't sleep. Instead, I opened the encrypted laptop I carry on all assignments. My mission was no longer about personal pain. It was about exposing a truth that had been buried for far too long. Revenge was a messy, emotional affair. I was seeking something cleaner, colder, justice. At 200 hours, I initiated a secure call to Ben Carter. He answered instantly, his voice alert. "Ben," I began, my tone devoid of emotion, clipped and precise as a mission briefing. "I need everything you can get on Vice Admiral Croft, specifically pertaining to the Orion incident. I want the unedited reports, the raw audio logs from the command center, and all original witness statements. Cross-reference them with any financial links between Croft and my father's investment firm. I need it all." There was no hesitation, no question of why. Just the calm, unwavering response of a trusted officer. "Roger that, Admiral. Give me 12 hours. I knew Ben wasn't just my subordinate. He was the hub of an informal network of loyal officers, many of whom had also been sidelined or wronged by Croft's political maneuvering. My weapon in this fight wouldn't be a Tomahawk missile, it would be information. And I was about to launch a full-scale information warfare campaign. While I waited, I turned my attention to the present. I pulled up the high-resolution photos from Eliza's engagement party. My eyes scanned past the fake smiles and champagne glasses, settling on the ornate gold locket around my sister's neck. A gift, the tag had said, from the Croft Legacy Foundation. A charitable front for a man who possessed no charity. Croft never did anything without a strategic purpose. My training as an intelligence officer took over. I zoomed in, enhancing the image. The locket's design was intricate, but it seemed heavier, bulkier than a purely decorative piece should be. Along the filigree edge, I detected a nearly invisible seam, one that didn't belong. A cold suspicion bloomed in my mind. I immediately sent the encrypted image file to Ben with a single clear directive. Analyze this object, highest priority. This wedding was no longer just a family drama. It had the makings of a hostile operation. By dawn, as the first gray light of morning filtered into my room, a secure email arrived from Ben. The subject line was one word: Orion unedited. I opened the file. The raw truth was more damning than I had remembered. The unedited reports showed Croft had personally overridden safety protocols, pushing the USS Orion into a treacherous undersea canyon to show off a new, unproven sonar system to a group of potential investors. Then came the audio logs, his voice crisp and chillingly calm in the face of disaster. The asset is compromised. We will maintain perimeter and control the narrative. The potential loss of life is an acceptable risk. Acceptable risk. He was talking about my people. Then my own voice cut through the chaos, a recording I hadn't heard in years. I was a commander then. Negative command. I am overriding that order. We are initiating search and rescue protocols. Now. My hands clenched into fists. The evidence was irrefutable. Croft wasn't just incompetent. He was a monster who had weighed human lives against his career and found them wanting. The final piece of the puzzle lay in the list of survivors from the incident. My eyes scanned the names until one jumped out: Captain David Egan, retired. I remembered him, a good, steady commander who had been forced into early retirement after the official, sanitized report came out. A quick search showed he was living in Mystic, Connecticut, a mere hour's drive from Newport. I found his number and dialed, my heart pounding a steady, rhythmic beat. An older man's cautious voice answered. "Captain Egan," I said, "this is Elena Vance." There was a long pause on the other end. Then his voice changed, warmth and respect flooding into it. "Commander Vance," he corrected me, using the rank I held then. "I'll never forget what you did for my crew, for me, that day." I explained the situation briefly: the wedding, Croft's presence, my father's involvement. Egan didn't need any convincing. "That son of a bitch is going to be there?" he said, his voice a low growl. "Good, then so will I. It's about time the real story was told." I hung up the phone, a grim sense of satisfaction settling over me. I now had all the components for my operation. I had the irrefutable evidence. I had the motive. And now I had a living, breathing witness with unimpeachable credibility. Croft and my family thought they were attending a wedding. They had no idea they were about to walk into a court-martial, and the stage was already set. I looked over at the service dress white uniform, hanging pristine and ready. It was time to put it on. I walked into the grand ballroom of the Chandler with the calm deliberation of a commander boarding the flagship. I did not wear the beige dress. I wore my service dress white uniform, the twin silver stars on my shoulder boards catching the light from the crystal chandeliers. As I entered, a wave of silence rippled through the room. The polite chatter of Newport's elite died in their throats. Every head turned. I saw my mother, Eleanor, across the room. Her face, a mask of social grace, moments before, went rigid, her skin paling in fury. My father, Richard, caught my eye and immediately looked away, turning his back to me as if I were a stranger. Eliza shot me a look of pure, venomous disbelief. I ignored them all. With my back straight and my chin held high, I walked calmly to my assigned seat, the lone chair in the last row, a place of exile, and sat down. My presence in that uniform was not a plea for attention. It was a declaration of war. The ceremony began, a symphony of orchestrated perfection. The officiant spoke of love, trust, and honor, words that felt hollow and profane in that room. From my vantage point, I watched the front row. Vice Admiral Croft sat there, the picture of dignity, applauding politely. My father sat beside him, nodding in agreement, a loyal business partner. The air was thick with hypocrisy. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. The officiant, with a warm smile, said, "At this time, we'd like to take a moment to honor the brave men and women of our armed forces who may be with us today." As planned, Captain Ben Carter stood. He was in his own immaculate white uniform, a stark pillar of integrity in the lavish room. But he didn't just stand. He turned, pivoting on his heel to face the back of the room. He looked directly at me. His hand snapped up to his brow in a salute so crisp, so perfect, it cut through the air. And then he spoke, his voice not loud, but carrying across the stunned silence with absolute authority. "Rear Admiral Elena Vance, ma'am." A collective gasp swept the room. Whispers erupted like wildfire. A Rear Admiral, here, sitting in the back? My mother's hand flew to her pearls, her face a mixture of horror and dawning recognition. My father froze mid-smile. Eliza stared, her mouth agape. The timing was precise. Immediately following Ben's salute, the large screens flanking the altar, which had been set to display a romantic slideshow, flickered and went black. A moment later, they came to life again, not with smiling photos of the happy couple, but with the cold blue and green tactical display of an underwater sonar map, the map of the Orion incident. Ben, through a former Navy technician on the venue's AV team, had seized control. Then the speakers crackled. Croft's voice, amplified throughout the silent ballroom, was chillingly clear. "The potential loss of life is an acceptable risk. Control the narrative." The crowd murmured, a low, confused hum. Then my own voice answered from the past, sharp and decisive. "Negative command. I am overriding that order. Initiate search and rescue protocols, now." The screens switched to harrowing footage from a deep-sea ROV, showing the mangled hull of the submarine and the desperate, heroic work of the rescue divers. The confused hum in the room turned to audible shock. Croft shot to his feet, his face as white as my uniform. "This is slander! This data has been falsified!" he yelled, his voice cracking. My father stood with him, babbling about a technical glitch, a tasteless prank. But before their lies could take root, another figure rose from the crowd. He was an older man in a simple tweed jacket, but he stood with an unshakable authority. "My name is David Egan," he announced, his voice booming with the command of a lifelong captain. The room fell silent again. "I was the commanding officer of the USS Orion. That recording is real. That footage is real. Vice Admiral Croft, right there, left us to die to protect his career." His gaze then shifted, finding me in the back row. He looked directly at me, his eyes filled with a gratitude that transcended time. "And that woman," he said, pointing a steady finger, "the one you sat in the back of the room, was then Commander Vance. She defied a cowardly order, and she saved our lives." Though in civilian clothes, Captain Egan stood at attention and gave me a slow, deliberate nod of salute. The room erupted. It was no longer whispers, but shouts. Phones were raised, cameras flashing, recording the chaos. The carefully constructed facade of the Vancecroft dynasty had not just cracked, it had been blown to pieces in front of everyone who mattered. The game was over. The moment Captain Egan finished speaking, the opulent ballroom descended into chaos. The carefully constructed symphony of the wedding shattered into a cacophony of gasps, frantic whispers, and the insistent flashing of cell phone cameras. The guests, pillars of Newport and Washington society, were no longer passive observers. They were witnesses, and their phones were broadcasting the downfall of two powerful men in real time. The society reporters, who had come expecting a story about peonies and lace, now had the scandal of the decade. I watched as Vice Admiral Croft, his face a ghastly shade of white, tried to make a discreet exit, but his path was silently, immovably blocked by Ben Carter and two other officers I recognized, all standing at parade rest. They didn't touch him. They didn't have to. Their steadfast presence was a wall of honor he could not breach. My father, Richard, was trying to do damage control, his voice a desperate, sputtering engine trying to start. A misunderstanding, a technical error, he pleaded to anyone who would listen. But no one was listening. They were all watching the empire of Vance and Croft crumble into dust. They had built their house of cards on a foundation of lies, and they had underestimated the storm that was their own discarded daughter. The venue's security, looking overwhelmed, quickly escorted the key players, my parents, a tear-streaked Eliza, a shell-shocked Croft, and me, into a private drawing room off the main hall. The heavy oak door closed, shutting out the noise, but trapping us in a suffocating silence. It didn't last. My mother, Eleanor, her face contorted with a rage I had never seen before, lunged towards me. "How could you?" she hissed, her voice trembling with fury. "You have ruined everything, the family's reputation, your sister's wedding, years of work gone." My father, his bravado gone, pointed a trembling finger at me. "You will pay for this, Elena. I swear to God, you will pay." But their words, once so powerful, now felt like spent ammunition. They were just noise, the meaningless fury of cornered animals. I looked directly into my mother's raging eyes, and my voice, when it came, was steady and cold. "A reputation built on lies is not a reputation, Mother. It's a prison. And today I set myself free. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. My calm, the unnatural stillness of a ship in the eye of a hurricane, seemed to frighten them more than any outburst would have. Eliza, her designer wedding gown, now looking like a costume, ran to me, grabbing my arm. Her mascara was smeared, her face blotchy. "Elena, please," she sobbed, the practiced tears of a lifetime of manipulation flowing freely. "Just take it back. Tell them it was a mistake. You've ruined my most important day." I looked down at her hand clutching my sleeve, the hand that had always received everything so effortlessly. "Your most important day," I said, my voice soft but unyielding, "was financed by a cover-up that almost cost dozens of men their lives. Is that truly the foundation you want for your marriage, Eliza?" I gently, deliberately, pried her fingers from my arm. The physical contact was broken, and with it, something final. "The game is over, Eliza," I said. "There's no one left for you to manipulate." For the first time in her life, she looked at me, not with scorn, but with a dawning, horrified awe, as if seeing a stranger who inexplicably wore her sister's face. Just then, the oak door opened again. It wasn't hotel security. Two grim-faced individuals in dark suits, their credentials clipped to their belts, entered, followed by two uniformed Newport police officers. They ignored the rest of us. Their focus was singular. "Vice Admiral Harrison Croft," the lead agent said, his voice flat and official. "You are under arrest on suspicion of obstruction of justice and falsification of national defense intelligence in connection with the Orion incident." As they snapped the handcuffs onto Croft's wrists, a sound that echoed loudly in the quiet room, my father collapsed into a brocaded armchair as if his strings had been cut. In that moment of suspended chaos, I turned and walked towards the door. "Elena, where are you going?" my mother called out, her voice a strange mix of command and desperation. I didn't turn back. I paused at the threshold, my hand on the door. "I'm going where I belong," I said, my voice clear and final for all of them to hear. "And it is no longer here." I stepped out of the room, leaving the wreckage of my family behind me, and closed the door on a life that was no longer mine. The air in the hallway, though still buzzing with the aftershocks of the event, felt cleaner, lighter. I felt empty. But it was a peaceful emptiness, a void where a lifetime of pain used to be. The battle was over, but I knew the real war, the one to heal and reclaim my own life, had only just begun. When I walked out of that room, I didn't feel triumph or sadness. I felt quiet, a peaceful void where a lifetime of struggle used to be. The battle I had fought for decades was over, but I knew the real war, the one to heal my own heart, was just beginning. Months passed. The scandal of the Vance Croft wedding faded from the headlines. Harrison Croft was facing a court-martial, his celebrated career ending in disgrace. My father's business suffered catastrophic losses as partners and investors fled from the stench of the scandal. I heard through the grapevine that the wedding had been unceremoniously canceled. I felt nothing about it. Their world had become a foreign country to me. One crisp autumn afternoon, I was taking a rare walk along the waterfront in Norfolk, watching the destroyers and carriers glide in and out of the harbor. A young woman pushing a stroller hesitated, then approached me. "Excuse me," she said, her voice shy. "Are you Admiral Vance?" I nodded, offering a small smile. Her eyes welled up with tears. "My husband. He was a petty officer on the Orion. He talks about you all the time. He says he's alive today because of you." The little girl in the stroller, no older than 5, with bright, curious eyes, held out a crayon drawing. It was a lopsided picture of a big gray ship and a stick figure in a white uniform with bright yellow hair. "Thank you," the little girl whispered. I took the drawing from her small hand, my throat tight. I looked from the child's earnest face to the simple, heartfelt piece of paper. This was the recognition I had spent a lifetime craving. It didn't come in a Newport mansion or at a society gala. It came on a windy pier, a gift from the very people I had sworn an oath to protect. My true legacy wasn't my name, it was theirs. That evening, back in my office overlooking the water, I did something I hadn't done in years. I tried to write a letter to my family. I filled pages with explanations, with the lingering pain, with the reasons why. I tried to make them understand. But after reading it over, I realized the futility of it. I wasn't writing it for them. I was writing it for a younger version of myself, who still believed they might one day listen. I no longer needed their understanding. I no longer owed them an explanation. With a sense of finality, I tore the letter into pieces, just as I had torn up that check all those years ago. I opened my desk drawer and took out the antique brass compass, the one Eliza had discarded. Ben had quietly retrieved it from the restaurant that night and given it back to me. I polished its surface with my thumb and placed it on my desk right next to my command insignia. It was no longer a symbol of rejection. It was my own true north, a reminder that my direction was my own, guided by my own values, not by the shifting winds of their approval. The most important forgiveness I needed was not from them, but for myself, for spending so many years hoping for a love they were incapable of giving. The following spring, I was invited back to Annapolis. It wasn't a grand affair. It was a quiet, dignified ceremony in the Naval Academy's Memorial Hall. A new bronze plaque was being unveiled. It didn't just list the names of the fallen. For the first time, it officially acknowledged the Orion incident, honoring the uncommon valor and decisive leadership that saved the crew. My name was there, etched in the enduring metal. Ben Carter, recently promoted to captain, stood beside me. Captain Egan was there, along with a dozen other survivors from the Orion, their faces older, but their gratitude timeless. There were no news cameras, no politicians, just sailors, a family bound by a shared respect for true honor. As I reached out and traced the cool, raised letters of my own name, a profound sense of peace washed over me. History, at last, had been written correctly. The story ends, but my life did not. It began anew. This morning, I stood on the command bridge of the USS Gerald R. Ford, one of the most powerful warships ever built. A new command, a larger fleet, a greater responsibility. As the first rays of dawn broke over the vast, empty expanse of the Atlantic, Captain Ben Carter stood beside me. "It's a beautiful morning, Admiral," he said. I smiled, a real, unburdened smile that reached my eyes. The sun was climbing, painting the horizon in strokes of gold and orange. The past was a shadow behind me, and the future was an open ocean. "Yes, it is, Ben," I replied, my voice filled with a hope I thought I had lost forever. A very beautiful day. I was no longer the rejected daughter of the Vance family. I was Admiral Elena Vance, a leader, a mentor, a guardian. And my legacy wouldn't be found in their family albums. It would be written on the waves. We all have a past that shapes us, but it doesn't have to define us. Your true legacy is the one you build for yourself, starting today. What is the first step you'll take to build yours? Share your promise to the future in the comments.